The CEO had been traveling all morning, moving from one city to another, juggling meetings, phone calls, and countless emails, his mind already running through the next set of decisions he would have to make. First-class travel had always been a small luxury he allowed himself, a space where he could breathe, organize his thoughts, and prepare for the whirlwind of responsibilities waiting at his destination. He arrived at the gate early, as always, not just out of habit but from a desire to be prepared, to ensure everything went smoothly. The airport was bustling with the usual mix of travelers, hurried parents, businesspeople clutching laptops, and tourists trying to navigate the maze of check-ins and security lines. He moved with calm efficiency, sliding his boarding pass through the scanner, feeling the soft nod of recognition from the gate staff who had seen him several times before. The flight attendants had already been informed of his VIP status. His seat was assigned, his name noted, his presence anticipated, the subtle respect owed to someone of his stature quietly extended. As he walked down the jet bridge, he noticed other passengers settling in, some glancing at him with a mix of curiosity and recognition, perhaps noticing the aura that naturally surrounded someone in a position of authority. His mind, though, was elsewhere, running through reports he had just reviewed, the financial summaries, the staffing decisions, the strategic moves that could change the course of the company he led. The world outside the plane seemed distant, a blur compared to the focused intensity of the life he led inside. The hum of the airplane engine as he stepped aboard seemed almost ceremonial, a reminder that for the next few hours, this would be his space of control, his small kingdom in the clouds. He reached his seat, the plush leather and ample space offering a welcome relief. He set down his briefcase, already mentally planning the tasks he would tackle during the flight, the emails he would respond to, the calls he would make. Everything was in order, routine, familiar. The seatbelt clicked securely over his lap, a small, satisfying confirmation that the journey had begun, that the small rituals that signaled order and comfort were in place. He glanced around, noticing the faces of other passengers, some already dozing, some reading, some scrolling through devices, each absorbed in their own worlds, unaware that they were about to witness a moment that would soon ripple far beyond the confines of this cabin. The flight attendants came by with the usual greetings, smiles polite and practiced, nods acknowledging his presence. He returned them with a polite nod, his demeanor calm, controlled, yet aware of the subtle power dynamics at play. In first class, etiquette and status were always a delicate dance, a balance between service and respect, between the protocols of the airline and the expectations of the passengers. Everything had been fine until the moment it wasn't. A commotion near the front of the cabin caught his attention. He didn't immediately react. He assumed it was a minor inconvenience, perhaps a passenger asking a question, a delay with service. But then the voice reached him, a polite yet unmistakable command that froze him in place. The flight attendant addressed him directly, asking him to relinquish his seat, to give up the space that had been assigned to him, the seat he had reserved, the seat that was his right as a paying VIP passenger. The reason? Another passenger, white, was apparently deemed more deserving, more important by some unwritten rule, some bias cloaked in airline protocol. The words hung in the air like a sudden storm, shocking in their audacity. He could feel the stares of fellow passengers, a mix of confusion, curiosity, and disbelief. Murmurs started to ripple through the cabin, subtle at first, then louder as people began to process what had just been announced. He looked at the attendant, calm but firm, waiting for clarification, for perhaps a moment of realization that a mistake had been made. But the insistence continued, a polite yet unyielding pressure that seemed to defy reason, defy the fairness that he had expected, that everyone had expected. The weight of the situation hit him in waves, a mix of frustration, incredulity, and a quiet fury that simmered beneath the surface. He knew his options were limited in the moment, yet his mind raced. He had faced challenges, obstacles, and prejudice before, but never in a space that was supposed to offer him respect and sanctuary, a place that should have been neutral, professional, courteous. The violation of that expectation was sharp, personal, and public. Around him, passengers were watching now more attentively, sensing the tension, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding in what should have been a routine boarding process. The CEO took a deep breath, grounding himself, feeling the surge of dignity and authority that came not from the seat he had paid for but from the life he had built, the respect he commanded through competence and character. This was not just about a seat, but about the principle, about fairness, about the audacity of someone thinking they could override the natural order of respect and professionalism in the air. The cabin seemed to hold its collective breath, the ordinary background noise of engines, seatbelt signs, and murmured conversations fading into the tense anticipation of what he would do next the moment the flight attendant repeated the request. The CEO's mind raced. This was no longer a small inconvenience or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate action, a decision made with the clear intention of prioritizing someone else over him, simply because of the color of his skin. The words, "You need to give up your seat," echoed in his mind, each syllable hitting harder than the last. Around him, passengers shifted in their seats, some glancing nervously at each other, unsure how to react, unsure if they should intervene or remain passive observers to a situation that already felt unjust. The cabin's usual hum of activity faded as the weight of the moment sank in, replaced by a charged silence, anticipation, and unspoken tension. He looked at the flight attendant directly, his eyes calm but piercing, measuring her resolve, gauging her willingness to stand by a decision that felt increasingly indefensible. There was no hesitance on her part, only the rehearsed politeness that masked a deep-seated bias, a confidence born of the knowledge that someone like him could be pressured to comply. He could see it clearly now. This was not a mistake or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a choice. It was a choice that was being made in the full knowledge that it would humiliate him, that it would test his composure, that it would challenge the very essence of his dignity in front of an audience of strangers. Passengers began to murmur more audibly, some questioning quietly, others watching intently, sensing that what was unfolding was far beyond the usual boarding drama. Whispers passed from row to row, a mix of outrage, disbelief, and curiosity. "Did they just ask him to move?" one passenger whispered, leaning toward a companion, eyes wide. "Why would they do that?" asked another, barely hiding the shock in their voice. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, instinctively looking away, while others leaned forward, drawn by the human drama that had unexpectedly landed in their midst. The CEO could feel the scrutiny, the collective gaze of dozens of people on him, measuring his reaction, wondering if he would comply or confront the audacity of what was happening. His response had to be precise, measured, and powerful. There was no room for anger to spill uncontrolled, no space for rash decisions that could escalate unnecessarily. He had learned long ago that power was not displayed through fury but through control, presence, and intelligence. He inhaled deeply, grounding himself, feeling the tension coiling inside him like a spring, ready to release in a moment of calculated action. Around him, the flight attendant repeated the request, now with a tone that hinted at impatience, a subtle insistence that she expected compliance. The word "please" was added now, but it carried no warmth, only the cold implication that he was expected to yield. The CEO's mind flicked through the options, analyzing the situation with the precision that had defined his career. He could refuse outright, risk confrontation, risk being forcibly moved, risk the potential embarrassment of escalation. Or he could find a way to turn the situation on its head, to reclaim the dignity and respect that was being denied, to make the injustice visible to everyone on board, to transform humiliation into empowerment. He could feel the eyes of the cabin on him, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some simply fascinated. Every second counted. Every movement mattered. The wrong response could change the course of the interaction entirely, either reinforcing the insult or dismantling it entirely. As he considered his next steps, the flight attendant's insistence became slightly firmer, more direct, as though she sensed his hesitation and interpreted it as potential compliance. She gestured toward the other seat, the one they expected him to take, a small but significant shift in the cabin's dynamics. The surrounding passengers could see the tension mounting, could feel the electricity in the air, as if the cabin itself had become a theater for the unfolding drama. Cameras and phones may have been out in some passengers' hands already, Not that anyone had made a move yet, but the awareness of the moment's significance was palpable. He spoke calmly, deliberately, a measured tone that cut through the tension, commanding attention without raising his voice. His words were not loud, but they carried the weight of authority, clarity, and an unspoken challenge. Around him, the passengers leaned in, sensing that something extraordinary was about to unfold. Even the flight attendant hesitated slightly, sensing that the usual tactics of politeness, protocol, and pressure might not work on someone who carried not just the weight of his position, but the certainty of his worth, his dignity, and his power. The cabin had transformed from a mundane first-class section into a stage where respect, privilege, and prejudice were about to collide in a way that no one could have predicted. Shock and disbelief rippled through the cabin like a wave, starting quietly, then gaining momentum as passengers absorbed the audacity of what had just occurred. The CEO sat in his assigned seat, eyes steady, expression calm, yet the weight of the humiliation threatened to settle heavily around him. The murmurs of other travelers began to grow, soft whispers transforming into audible conversations. Some passengers glanced at each other in disbelief, shaking their heads slightly, while others leaned forward from their seats. Curiosity piqued, hearts racing with a mix of excitement and moral outrage. The sense of injustice hung thick in the air, nearly tangible, making every movement inside the cabin deliberate, charged, and heightened. It was not just the act itself that stunned everyone, but the blatant disregard for professionalism and decency. The CEO, a figure of accomplishment, someone who had earned respect through intellect, perseverance, and leadership, was being asked to surrender something that was rightfully his. The audience, involuntarily drawn into the moment, instinctively began to analyze the situation. Some silently questioned their own reactions, wondering if they should intervene, speak up, or merely observe. Others were frozen, caught between disbelief and the innate human response to injustice, unsure how to navigate the tension that had suddenly engulfed their surroundings. From the front of the cabin, the flight attendants continued to press, their polite insistence cloaked over the unfairness of the demand. They carried out the airline's decision with a veneer of civility, but their body language and tone betrayed a subtle confidence, an assumption that their authority would be obeyed without challenge. Yet the CEO did not respond as expected. There was no immediate compliance, no hesitation that would signal submission. Instead, there was a deliberate pause, a calm yet potent silence that seemed to draw every eye toward him, as if the cabin itself held its breath, waiting to see how he would react to the indignity placed before him. His gaze swept the surrounding rows, noticing the passengers who were watching with wide eyes, some incredulous, others clearly sympathetic. The CEO could sense the shift in energy, the rising awareness that what was happening was not routine, that this was a moment where right and wrong, power and arrogance, dignity and bias, collided visibly. He recognized the significance immediately, not just for himself but for every person witnessing it. The situation had transformed into a silent trial, an unfolding drama in which he was both the protagonist and the arbiter of how this injustice would be addressed. He spoke, but not in anger. His words were deliberate, controlled, measured, and they carried an undeniable authority. Every syllable was chosen to convey the seriousness of the situation, the expectation of respect, and the refusal to accept humiliation silently. Passengers shifted in their seats, leaning forward slightly, drawn into the intensity of the exchange, sensing that the CEO's response would define the moment. There was an unspoken collective recognition among the onlookers that this confrontation was about more than a seat. It was about fairness, respect, and the courage to stand firm against blatant injustice. The murmurs from fellow passengers grew louder, a chorus of curiosity and disbelief. Some whispered encouragement to one another, some muttered exclamations of shock, while others remained silent, their attention riveted to the unfolding drama. The CEO's calmness, his controlled demeanor, contrasted sharply with the absurdity of the situation, creating a palpable tension that seemed to vibrate through the cabin. Even the flight attendants could feel it, the weight of dozens of witnesses bearing down on their authority, questioning, silently challenging, the assumption that the CEO could be coerced without resistance. Around him, subtle movements occurred, A hand clutched nervously to a coffee cup. A shoulder leaned forward in anticipation. A head turned to catch every nuance of what was being said. The cabin became a theater, every passenger an unintentional participant in a story that was unfolding in real time. The CEO's presence dominated the space, not through volume or force, but through calm, commanding authority. Every eye on him, every subtle gesture, every shifting posture reinforced the tension in the room. The injustice had become a shared experience, the indignity a stage for the CEO to assert not just his rights, but his power, his intellect, and his dignity, in a way that left no doubt about who truly commanded respect. The flight attendant attempted again, this time with a slightly firmer tone, still cloaked in politeness, but now underpinned with impatience and authority. Passengers watched, anticipating a reaction, sensing that the next move would define the narrative of the cabin. The CEO did not flinch, did not raise his voice, but his calm composure carried more weight than words could convey. Each second stretched, tension mounting with every passing heartbeat, as the passengers, flight attendants, and even nearby staff became enmeshed in the drama, unable to look away, caught between disbelief, awe, and the quiet realization that they were witnessing something extraordinary. The CEO's response was precise, measured, and powerful, a combination of calm authority and quiet intensity that immediately shifted the atmosphere of the cabin. He did not shout, he did not raise his voice, yet every word he spoke carried weight, as if the very air had thickened with the gravity of the situation. The flight attendant, who had been confident moments before, now found herself facing an unexpected challenge, someone who would not simply acquiesce to arbitrary demands. His tone was calm, deliberate, yet underneath it pulsed a quiet fire, the unmistakable energy of a person who had been tested countless times before in boardrooms, in negotiations, in situations where the stakes were sky-high and every decision mattered. Passengers immediately sensed the shift. The murmurs that had previously been tinged with shock and confusion now transformed into a collective, silent curiosity. Some passengers leaned forward, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, trying to catch every nuance of the unfolding drama. Others sat rigid, gripping armrests, sensing that the ordinary flight experience had transformed into something extraordinary. Whispers passed quietly, from one row to the next, a low hum of astonishment as people exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the audacity of the act and the brilliance of the response. The cabin seemed to vibrate with attention, as if every individual had become part of an unspoken jury, witnessing a confrontation that had escalated far beyond what anyone could have imagined. The CEO's body language mirrored his words, upright, composed, confident. There was no trace of panic or uncertainty, no hint of fear, only the measured calm of someone who understood not just the situation, but the power dynamics at play. His hands rested gently on the armrests, gestures minimal, controlled, yet every slight movement exuded authority. The flight attendant attempted to repeat the demand, softer this time, almost as if hoping the threat of insistence could pierce the calm that surrounded him. But it was too late. The moment had shifted irreversibly. The power dynamic in the cabin had changed, subtly but unmistakably, as the passengers recognized that the CEO was not simply resisting. He was asserting his rights, his dignity, and, in doing so, subtly exposing the unfairness of the entire scenario. Eyes darted from the CEO to the flight attendant, from the passengers to the unfolding confrontation, as the tension thickened. The whispers of disbelief now mingled with a growing sense of admiration, a recognition that the man in the seat had turned what could have been a humiliating moment into a demonstration of composure, strength, and intellect. Passengers, some of whom had initially felt awkward or hesitant, now straightened in their seats, subtly aligning themselves with the principle being defended. Even those who had remained neutral began to sense the moral clarity of the situation, a quiet understanding that what was unfolding was more than a personal conflict. It was a visible lesson in courage and integrity. The CEO continued speaking, each word deliberate, each phrase carefully chosen to convey his stance without aggression, but with undeniable firmness. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, every ear tuned to his voice, every eye on his expression. The subtle intensity of his gaze, the calm but unyielding posture, and the measured tone all combined to create an atmosphere of undeniable presence. A quiet power that made it clear that he would not be moved. Passengers could feel the weight of the moment, sensing that the ordinary rules of airline protocol were being challenged not through anger or confrontation, but through sheer force of character and the unwavering assertion of principle. As the conversation continued, subtle reactions occurred throughout the cabin. Heads nodded slightly, gestures of quiet support and acknowledgement passed from row to row. A hand adjusted on a lap, a sigh released in recognition, a slight smile of empathy, tiny movement.